Say you got out of work or school or whatever tomorrow, and suddenly there's an alien spaceship hovering over the city, shading the entire landscape. It sends out smaller ships every now and then, but it never attacks or communicates, simply drifting from location to location without known reason. With little information, on the day it appears, the World Police United States decide to attack it, a mission whose only result is a section of the city now full of rubble and toxins, and almost everyone who used to live there becoming an internal refugee. Some have no choice but to stay in or near the zone, and some remain in the temporary housing well past the event because it's affordable. The news and markets begin to swarm the topic, with daily bulletins on new activity and every kind of theory about the intent of the ship. Measures of a new kind of radiation are reported with the weather, and with that comes a flood of products to protect you from those possibly harmful, just as possibly harmless rays. Some remain in the city to live like always, while others flee to newly formed communes well away. Some call it an invasion and want the ship destroyed, and others meet a handful of its inhabitants, stressing that they can think and feel just like us. This forms two positions that are only growing ever more opposed as time goes on. And you aren't really any of this. You're an average student in the final year of high school, standing at the precipice of that long-awaited adult life and now doubting if there's even a future to be an adult in after 3 years of this Cold War and its blanket of uncertainty, fear, and conflict. This is Dead Demons Dededede Destruction. Yes, the title is a mouthful, and that premise is the case for Kadode and Ouran at least, a pair of best friends who witnessed all of this chaos, endure this Cold War, and then live out usual high school days. When we witness them, the news is always on, the issue always present, but only ever in the background, drowned out by more immediate sounds or obscured by more immediate people and things. While it festers unnoticed, they talk about their crushes or rush home to play a new shooter, and the 2 times it is noticed, it's just so Ouran can steal from a crash site and get on the news, and then Kadode reacting to her friend being on the news. These girls hardly even think about their own futures, let alone the world's, skipping classes to savor a sunset or falling asleep during them instead, going so far as to choose a new DLC over studying for entrance exams. With choices like this, the duo of once advanced students now can't even get into a good college. Their care for anything that isn't strictly personal is just non-existent. With so much history being made all around them, so much to impact the future and to be cared about, is this right? Does it make them childish, selfish, to witness the world, even just their corner of it, and not care at all about its workings or outcome? The reason I'm making this video, and probably the reason why this story was made some 10 years ago now, is because this seems to always be on our minds in an age of information. I mean, before you had to wait for the news to come to you at least. It was a process, a ritual, it had excuses. But now it's become a constant duty in your pocket at all times, from your social circles happenings all the way up to UN resolutions. And so we're forced to face the question, what is our responsibility to be aware, to be plugged into the current events which are so rapid that it feels more accurate to call them past events, things beyond our control which throw our personal plans into chaos anyway. And that's the kicker, that relationship where it impacts us and yet is formed well beyond ourselves. We need the wider world to have a personal future, and it needs all of our personal futures to have any power to begin with. So how are we supposed to manage this balance? Is it right to focus on your inconsequential self over the required world? Can we even do anything about that world? And are our personal lives actually so inconsequential? And then how does all of this divide us and make these situations to begin with? These are my overly serious questions about a seriously silly anime, a video that won't answer them, but will put some ideas to them. Now, we have to start this all with a little caveat. DDDD is a story about a balanced enough issue with real causes and impacts on all its people. The mothership and invaders, an analog to, of course, our real-world issues, requires a defined understanding of causes and effects, weighing how they will impact who. Based on what leadership decides, a majority of citizens' lives will truly change. This means that all of our discussion will apply to the same thing, to true issues and not to culture wars or moral panic and the like. For example, a lifestyle choice that one person practices within their own consensual bounds, say religion or a same-sex relationship, aren't true issues. Hi, this is editing me here, realizing that wording can be heard in a very unintended way. By real issue, I don't mean that rights being taken away isn't a real issue, for example. I just mean that it's something a hateful side of politics had to invent as an issue, not one which should actually exist. Anyway, just clarifying that, and we'll get back to the video. Writing policy which forbids such things would only have a negative impact on one group for no tangible benefit. However, the decision to, say, withhold federal funding from foreign aid to respond to a disaster at home instead is a true issue with obvious benefits and drawbacks alike for either choice or balance between the two. So, what we're discussing today only applies to that latter case. With that in mind, we're going to start with the question of division, since every true issue will have it. Dead Demons has two sides, Warctopuses and Peace Squids, the former wanting to attack the mothership and kill any invaders, and the latter seeking to bridge the gap and create peace between humans and invaders instead. We get a good view of this when the main cast, namely Ouran and Kadode plus new friend Futaba, have a meal with the Peace Squid group ship, that's share invader protection, following one of their protests. The discussion is overheard by a few seeming salarymen, and one of them begins an argument. The businessmen understand the economic side of things, knowing that a wartime effort is an amazing boost, especially one where they're hardly even incurring losses. This will create new factories with new jobs in areas which need stimulation, reviving ghost towns. Plus, this places Japan ahead of the world on arms production, which can be shifted to foreign sales once the mothership is destroyed. And those advancements can easily be adapted to new industries as well, just like how the company producing the new weapons, SES, once started as a toy manufacturer. Meanwhile, the ship members have gone deep on understanding the social actions and consequences, probably studying the videos of humans interacting with invaders, where it's plainly obvious that they can think and feel just as we do, able to communicate and even form bonds with us. To mercilessly kill them, and doing so with weapons that use AI to select and eliminate their targets based on appearance, has clearly disastrous implications for humanity's future and our rights. We see that everyone involved in this argument has actually gathered evidence and formed a true statement based on history, precedent, different factors that they can use to say this has happened before and will probably happen again. Now, of course, I agree with Ship more. I think it's quite pointless to create an economic boom if that requires killing creatures which are known to think and feel and bond as we do, because where does that end? What good is the economics that kills the kind of being meant to benefit from it? However, the complexity is that neither side is entirely false. While total commitment to economics over people sounds and is deeply immoral, what is the point of respecting all this life if there's nothing being made to better those lives? The comfort we know and love of modern life is kind of built on inherent cruelty to other lives. I would still argue that the scale should tip majorly towards Ship, but I can't say it should entirely. And what shows this best is that, in the end, neither of them is right anyway. Yes, the invaders are helpless creatures stuck here, abandoned by their homeworld and unable to really harm us. But they did come here wanting to, believing they would be able to take over the planet and use us as slaves or pets. While the all-out war that we chose wasn't optional, absolute kindness wouldn't have been either. Another little note here, putting this together in my own head, I know where I stand, so this felt fine to say, but hearing it back and adding clips to it all, it felt a little unfairly both sides, so I wanted to make mention that Ship and those vying for peace are clearly more right here. The brutality against the invaders, even as that was their intention, simply could not be justified. The best solution was weighted much more to peace than it was to violence, which is a crucial part of all of this. A compromise does not mean directly in the middle, it simply means some elements of both. I think from what we'll discuss later, you could add a rule of thumb like err towards the side which is more positive, which we'll get back to later after the rest of this. Okay, if they've all gathered evidence and the answer is somewhere between all of it, why aren't they making a solution together? Isn't that the obvious path? Well, if that was the case, then we wouldn't have such a disdain for politics that this show is modeled after to begin with. Rather, this is inherent to the depth required to understand each element of the issue in the first place. For someone to get to that point means days, weeks, maybe even months or years of their life gathering the information which has informed their viewpoint, interviews with invaders, and entire books about the situation, lengthy economic evaluations, and heaps of historical parallels, time and energy consuming, well, all their things. There have literally been less opportunities in their life in order to facilitate this one opportunity. And, well, as we've said time and time again, that's importance. Would you really want to believe that you spent all that time and energy on something that isn't so, gave up so many other options for one that wasn't worthwhile? The more spent, the more it means. You've heard the word sunken cost for a reason. Plus, once you've studied a topic that much, you understand its complexities, small components that others may not be aware of. Looking at the invaders broadly, you might think that, well, they can think and feel, but that means little to you because they're a homogeneous blob, no men or women or children, just the same form over and over. But once you learn that they have relationships and children, once you hear their voices and all the variations they have, and once you see how they can even be shaped differently, well, what's been slaughtered isn't a homogeneous blob, it's an individual. They can only be understood in the proper depth, with all this time and energy spent to see these things. So that when you say invader, having seen them, and someone else says invader, having not, well, you're essentially saying different words but thinking they're the same. And since the other person doesn't have the same information exactly because they've spent their time and energy on something else, in this case the economic considerations, then this is almost inherent, this divide. The more we understand something to address these situations properly, the more a compromise becomes a disrespect to everything we find important about it. And that's only reinforced by just how many elements there are to each issue as well. Let's look at just how much is wrapped up in the mothership one in DDDD. Well, it begins with the US possibly overreaching its boundaries and attacking the mothership without consent, but Japan can't exactly break off contact over that because it's the freaking US, and they might need that kind of force in the future, so they're coerced into this warlike position to a degree by foreign policy. Foreign policy which, unfortunately true to real life, relies on the turmoil and nonsense of a country which doesn't even understand its own leader, so how can anyone in Japan truly know what the next move is? To maintain that safety and research, they have to appease as much as possible. Now, they can't get away from reliance on the US and do, but this substitutes in a private company to produce the arms, SES, the one which used to make toys but got into robotics and now makes walking death machines, a private company which of course is out for profits and is only going to release careful PR, so understanding that side is basically a surprise each time. Then the government wasn't even honest about whether there were invaders at first, simply hoping to exterminate them rather than let it be known, so there's tons of false information about that, to the point that a major conspiracy nut is actually entirely factually right about them at first, making an important position of truth that was once a nutcase conspiracy theory, leaving a weird and lasting effect on how it'll be treated. And that's all before we ever get even trying to understand those individuals, the invaders, instead of if they just exist, something which relies on our knowledge of human rights precedent as well as probably some philosophy or psychology to understand the impact of what we choose, like how Futaba points out that even calling them invaders has a leading bias to it. In the midst of all this, there are people making up entirely false information for fame, attention, money, so you could learn about an entirely fake issue anyway, and even when you break through into the real information, it's just 25 publications repeating the same says nothing PR statement for clicks. Even if someone was free all day, every day, there would be no way for them to truly understand every single happening surrounding the mothership. They're destined to only know about a select few, and exactly from doing so, find those to be the most important ones. And that's the ideal case, before we even consider that, well, no one is free all day, every day. Some people aren't even free enough to have an opinion. Take I, a friend of Kadode and Ouran, who has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 younger brothers to take care of, basically without help. 5 younger, rowdy, loud brothers who can get lost and need meals and new clothes and to get to school and, well, everything. Do you think she has the time to go in depth on the issues of the mothership when she has a literally but legal obligation to deal with other issues first, let alone a moral and personal one? She doesn't even have time for a relationship, turning down the offer from a decent guy who showed her a great day around Tokyo so that she could focus on family instead. Can we really say that I should have to ignore not just family, but even further if she managed that hurdle, all personal enjoyment to try and understand politics? I does have one advantage though, and it's that at least she knows what's important. Issues related to housing, schooling, those kind of things she can tune into and be aware of because her sight is so focused, meshing with that limited time in a decent way. But this can be reversed. Does everyone actually know what impacts them? We have to think about Makoto. Growing up in a small town of some pretty standard men as the only connections, they've had little time to express anything unique. But as it turns out, they want to be a lot more feminine, something they've only been able to do in private so far. Moving to Tokyo to finally express their identity, it's a unique situation. They do try to explain what they feel, but they don't quite have the words for it yet. They can't say what's truly important, the elements which really define them. So how will their identity emerge from this test and then determine their concerns? Should they be thinking of men's issues or women's, queer ones or straight ones? What will happen to Tokyo or what will happen in their small town back home? Their issue is not having the proper starting point to understand their own involvement to begin with, a situation which demands that we focus on our personal lives a decent amount before anything else. And this is starting to get to the heart of it, shown best with Kadode and her relationship with Watarase, her former teacher. Waiting around since high school to get this time with him, this is the personal desire that's actually made the future worthwhile to her for so long. It wasn't grades or university or politics. What led her to graduate and as such become a functioning member of society, an adult, is just wanting him and wanting it to be legal and somewhat acceptable. So her contribution to the issues only arise from chasing her own life. And not only does this time and effort then make it all the more important to her, meaning she'll focus on this because it's literally been years of her life, but what was the point of it all if she isn't present to then make it happen, to get the payoff? This is what she focused on to actually get through all these days and progress into adult life, so if she drops it now to think about politics out of responsibility, what's really going to keep her moving forward to make it into the next day again? What is there to actually contribute to the greater future for personally? That is, what's the point of a wider world without a personal one to make it worthwhile? Kadode's is the most revealing because of this fact, that it lays bare that we don't survive just for a better world, we survive for a better world for people. The root always is and must be the individual and their desires. To be with family, to be adored like an idol, to find that dreamt of romance. Without all this personal stuff, there aren't even people to experience and be impacted by the wider world to begin with. This further complicates the problem then because with how large these issues are, we think of them as kind of standalone, components of the world that we inhabit and not specifically us. Like the economy, that's not people, that's the framework that people inhabit. We're literally born into it, something we can't help. But then an economy doesn't just exist in nature, at least not a formal one with currency and specialized work. If every human died, so would capitalism and communism. So in a way, they're just personal desires extended outward. Someone long ago who sought their own safety or thought it was the best way to allow others to do the same. Mostly, everything we take as worldly was just born from us. DDDD stresses this to no end, with each and every wider issue having a deeply personal root. Ship is trying to assassinate the head of SES, but he's the former lover of the woman organizing the assassination, which might not totally enclose, but does code that decision. And SES is researching alien tech not for consumer or government goals, but to create an arc to save their own skin. It's literally impossible to know if A-rays are harmful or not because everyone trying to profit off them, which then turns into whatever they desire from that money is the personal reason. Crash sites are remembered as important by the names and faces of those lost, a personal issue. Ship members high and low sleep together, and so do the workers at SES, while journalists investigating them both are doing so for old grudges, and other ones on TV are worried about their hair in front of a crash site because maybe their crush or family is watching. Hell, even the invasion itself, the literal fate of Earth, came about from a grudge, as we'll see and discuss later. Everything that seems so wide is actually so personal. It's actually almost silly when we boil it down so much. Every single issue which exists only matters because it impacts people, so it literally has to be personal deep down. If they didn't impact us, then they wouldn't be issues to begin with. Maybe we were asking the wrong questions. Is there really even a debate about the rightness or wrongness of focusing on the self when that's the root of everything? Now, this leads to an interesting situation. We can understand everything is personal, yet we are within a social framework. We elect leaders who make decisions for us, we pay taxes to support specific services, we work for money and spend that on what other people make with their work. None of this functions alone, so we can't exist alone in our desires. What do we do about that? Well, DDDD examines two options of trying to get around it. We either work in spite of it, or simply ignore it. To examine the former, we have Futaba, a girl who leaves the same small town as Makoto, which is just finishing its SCS production facility for university in Tokyo. She does it because, well, here are her own words on it.
I'm not gonna react to something without thinking first. If I go to Tokyo, I'll be able to confirm with my own eyes what's actually going on.
As such, she gets involved with SHIP on campus, protesting the Warhawk actions and continued armament. At first, this leads to a pretty big boost in how she feels about life, with a real sense of both empowerment and community. Because now, it's not just one will fighting against the wider world, but hundreds at once, increasing the power and reducing the time and energy required. And especially because of that, she gets to be around some like-minded people that she'll pretty assuredly be able to get along with, which then only increases the power and community more, as that helps to bring in all those people who feel the same. And maybe, just maybe, this grouping can then go beyond the personal selfishness by merging, coalescing into like one being which mellows out the extremes and leaves behind the most important, most unanimous bits. It's still a personal, but it's at least an average of many personals, if nothing else. But those personals still cause a division, even within such like-minded people. Because what is SHIP really? What does it mean and how is it composed? The most obvious problem is that it's made of people who have their own lives and reasonings, things which are independent of a big group like that. It's going to feel large and powerful before classes, everyone entering campus with a mind open to possibilities and the energy to chase them, maybe even feeling a need to get involved and make friends, survive this new big city. But as classes kick off and start to cause schedule conflicts, as tests begin to take away more time and energy, as everyone's personal future comes under threat, there's simply less time to get to the wider one. Some people who really care will be forced out and feel terrible for it, but what can they do? It's the same as everything we discussed with Ai and Makoto and Kadode. And as some of those others will simply have never cared to begin with anyway, like one of the members who Futaba was sleeping with. He was a face in the crowd to bulk up that number, technically adding value to their cause. But as the group started to dwindle and he sees less opportunity to hang out and have fun, more work that he can't fade into the background of, he just simply says,
"Well, sure, but what exactly does that have to do with you and me?"
And sure, she can slap him and keep up her efforts, but that doesn't change how he was able to be such an asshole. There has to be an aspect of pleasure to these things. They felt so powerful exactly because some people were willing to join a thing they only half cared for, to form a coalition based on pleasure, because people they liked did and maybe they'll meet more who did. Would anyone have joined at all if it seemed grim and overly serious? This opens the door for some fair weather fans, some advantage takers, and until we can read intent like psychopaths, we won't know until the actions themselves speak. So, sure, SHIP felt powerful once, but how much of that was removed due to outside factors, and, well, how much was just false? This becomes more apparent as the total number dwindles down from full-scale protests into just a dingy room with a handful of students, each exit making the next one more probable, and genuine change less possible. That energy all fades away, and what's left is simply a proof of the powerlessness they were seeking to escape, but with even more cost sunk into it. Because Futaba hasn't just felt powerless against life, say like Kadode did with Watarase. Despite waiting so long for that relationship, getting a dream date which she spends an entire night for researching, even a night spent together alone with him, it doesn't matter much when he might have to move away to take care of his aging father. All of her work, everything she waited for, time and place, invalidates it. It is a terrible thing to experience. It feels utterly powerless. But it wasn't entirely wasted. It still proved that she could achieve the kind of thing she wanted with the kind of person she liked, even left her with the proof of how her specific efforts made it possible and the motivation to do it again from those. What was left with her was still worthwhile, which is why she can leave it behind with a smile and just get back on with life the next morning, because she's proved she can do it again by doing it to begin with. It was only her efforts. She can't look outside and see something else that made it happen. It was her. It might have felt powerless because of the wider world, but in reality she has proved power despite that world. Futaba relying on others has simply proved her powerlessness for nothing, giving up that kind of pleasurable thing like a relationship to do so even. As everyone else was celebrating Ouran's birthday, she was trying to make up for the work and studying missed from ship events. As everyone else is enjoying the beach on the last days of vacation, living totally carefree, she's headed home early for the next ship meeting. She's the outside friend, on the fringes, and always worrying whether they'll hate ship more than they love her. If through that coalition she's already built a wall between them, ideals coming between people. So not only does she know that she's powerless, she's given up all the good things just to know it for certain. Her life is worse off than her friends, and it's from her efforts. Pretty much the exact opposite of Kadode. Trying to tackle these huge issues like Futaba, tying a whole part of yourself to the wills of others, it's pretty awful. Now, this isn't a guarantee. Social movements throughout history have led to, well, pretty much everything we love today over the past. We owe most of this modern world to people who pushed through all these costs, gave up so much for the future, and earned rewards that made it all well worthwhile. But they were matters with time and place to consider as well, with issues present in the hearts of so many at the right time to be acted upon, the kinds of movements which feel self-evident and simply being held back by genuine evil, not ones which are majorly here and then gone whenever we choose. How many other movements are long forgotten because they never managed a thing or tackled something temporary? How many others were evil instead, revoking rights and regressing our stories? And how many others simply failed and tossed someone back into their daily life with less motivation, which they slowly fell away from exactly to avoid that? This is not a guarantee. But this section is shorter because you probably knew all this anyway and just wanted me to say otherwise. But unfortunately, well, I can't. Since the last option had so many demotivating possibilities, we could also ignore the problem, either consciously or unconsciously determining that, well, the cause isn't a personal issue, but one of those self-evident ones that should be seen through simply because it should be. That would make the motivation, the reasoning a lot easier, but what else might it do? Well, this is young Kadode's arc, and where the show really gets wild. The invaders have a piece of technology that can plant itself in a moment in time and return to it from any point later. They hardly ever use it because they don't see a point in changing outcomes from the same will that made them to begin with, but one invader that young Kadode and Ouran meet, an inspector to judge Earth's colonization possibility, does offer them the chance. Upon taking it, this creates two timelines, the one we witness from the start of the show, and the one which starts from episode 6. We'll call them A and B respectively. Now, the inspector they meet in Timeline B doesn't just bring that along with him, but tons of other gadgets as well, like a device for flying, an invisibility cloak, and what's basically a pen that can apply intricate forces to objects. He shares these with them, mimicking the situations in the in-universe manga Isobeon, where a young girl selfishly uses alien tech to disastrous effect, a parody of the real-world manga Doraemon. Being a fan of this manga, Kadode has always hated the main character for being so selfish with the chance she's been provided. She can fly and become invisible and move objects at will, and all she does with it is solve petty personal issues, and even then fails at it from being so stupid. There's not much more of a wasted privilege than that, and so Kadode resolves to be different, using her very similar privilege to ignore the personal and seek out the wider issues instead, saving people and fixing problems all across the city. After all, what else would be right to do? This isn't a desire, this is an inherent duty. This is her intent, at least, clearly drawn from childlike innocence and a black and white view of the world, properly adolescent for a literal child. Inhabiting such a small world with many fewer complexities gathered across time, to them it makes sense that someone could simply choose to be or not to be selfish, because those are the level of situations that they have faced. They don't yet have the context of an adult, the more limited time and money made of one's own accord and a complex web of relationships and all of that. Their simplicity just doesn't apply to the wider world, yet that is the only way they can understand it. And so, with that in mind, Kadode's plans don't go, well, to plan, as her children's black and white begins to blur into an adult's gray. She tries to help a child who's locked in a parked car in summer, using that little pen device to unlock the door. But foiled by inexperience, she destroys the car and almost kills the kid instead. Okay, but that was simply from not using the device much before, so once she knows how to use it better, helping people will be cut and dry. So next, she wants to help a pregnant woman cross the train tracks, since it's a sweltering summer that must be making her suffer standing there. After all, what kind of world asks someone in such a rough position, quite literally providing the life this world needs, to do this? She tries to move the tracks upwards and the train with them so the woman can pass underneath, and just derails it instead, killing an elderly woman in the process. Unable to claim an experience this time, she's shocked. How did this happen? Well, what went wrong with her intent that was so pure? Maybe the issue is force. This device has to be forceful since that's all it's ever done. It's because the world has to be forceful, direct. Working around the issue is just a band-aid. Why not go for the source? That's why the world is forceful. People will die, so it should at least be the bad people. As she thinks when hearing the news report about the unintentional death to show this,
There are other people who deserve to die.
so she goes on to just directly killing the people who commit negative actions instead, asking each one for the worst person they know to take out the next and address the root of the issue. The problem though, the thing causing that force, is that she isn't aware of her own intent. Quite literally, she refused to consider it by rebuking the personal side. This removes a crucial aspect of how she interacts with the world, herself. The system impacting the train is not just the pen, it is her holding it, and if she never considers the latter, how can she know its importance and effects? She can have such an unintended consequence from this. The factors she was changing weren't what she actually thought they were. She wasn't seeing the real version of them. If she had considered her own input, then she could see where that force came from. Think about the method of getting past the train. Does it make sense to move the person, risking one, or to move the train, risking hundreds? Of course, it's the person, which we know from this device that it actually could have done too. But Kadode chose to risk the hundreds instead, and there has to be a reason for that. So what in her life could be projected onto helping someone who didn't ask for it? Which issue would she want resolved to cause that? Well, Kadode was someone almost perpetually bullied, only to then go home to a mother who pretty much does the same and a father who was always working and as such absent. She very much felt alone and like the world was designed to be against her, full of people who either harmed her or who allowed others to harm her unimpeded. Quite literally, the relationship of her mother and father. People who did the bullying and people who watched, and no one who ever helped. So when she sees this woman standing there, being held up by a whole train of people going past her, what she really sees is someone at a disadvantage and everyone else who's doing nothing to fix it, like her own situation. And so, she takes the option which risks them and uses more force than she intended to actually see that risk through because she's angry with them. Because they, people just living their lives, chose to be selfish as she sees it, from this one spot, this one point of view of a woman they have never met and couldn't even do anything for. It's not like they can ask the train to really stop, they wouldn't be listened to. Only by examining her own desires as factors, even if she didn't act on them still, could this have been seen. But it was covered up by blanket terms instead, like helping others, like justice. The power of those words is that they appear beyond the self, like some inherent truth of a greater reality. They're not names or places, they're not made of people, but simply understood by people about the world. They're things beyond, abstract, and not tied down by personal matters. She calls herself absolute because justice is absolute, unquestionable, and that's what she's acting on. But as she herself said,
I follow my own special code of justice. I guess deep down I just want to feel like we're needed by people.
those words aren't beyond us because they only mean what we interpret them to. Sure, they could exist somewhere in abstract space, even though they don't. If they did, we are still the ones who have to take them in and interpret them through our own lens. Even the things beyond us have to come through a personal space. Sure, this is sometimes achieved with a consensus in regards to words and terms, but only if we truly first address what we want them to mean, if we ensure that what everyone is saying is more than just what we want to hear. And so the first step in being selfless isn't just looking beyond to things like justice, but knowing the enemy, understanding the selfishness inherent to us. This is finally made apparent to Kadode through Ouran. They'd been classmates for a while, but never actually spoke to each other until they both happened to see the UFO which the inspector arrived on for just a split second. Feeling alone in this discovery, as it was literally gone before she could point it out, and having only the comfort of knowing Kadode would believe her too, Ouran takes the chance at saying hello during summer school when they're away from all the usual bullies who would destroy Ouran and her reputation for doing this. Bonded by this one experience, and actually finding an invader from it, they become truly close friends, even starting their campaign of good together. But as Ouran and Kadode's experiences drives their ideas of the world apart, and Kadode's to murder, their relationship reaches a boil. Kadode tells her that bystanders are just as guilty, but wasn't Ouran a bystander not so long ago? She points this out, likely still feeling guilty for all the times she chickened out, a timid girl watching someone else be treated so horribly when another voice really could have helped. But that's exactly why she chickened out. Yes, it was selfishness, not wanting to be uncomfortable for someone else's sake, but it was also for protection, staying in the good graces of, well, the entire class who are against Kadode. What if all it ended up doing was validating her closed-off nature? Even if Ouran did something wrong, she had an understandable reason for doing so, one which even Kadode gets since she claims Ouran as the one exception, the bystander she could understand. But this falls apart when Ouran gets mad at her for this contradiction. If Kadode is absolute, then why does anyone get a pass given she just agreed that the logic is eventually the whole world dies? If this is justice, something beyond human intentions, then Ouran herself should be a part of that set, killed just the same as everyone else. In literally fighting Kadode over this, it's made undeniable that this isn't some wider principle because the only benefactor is asking for the benefit to be removed. Is there anything less selfish than that, than someone giving up being offered the whole world? How can Kadode claim this is truly an absolute good when it's denied by someone like that, by some situation like this? She throws the invader tool away and leaves because of this, unable to continue down her path, both seeing and having to accept how wrong it was at once. She did all of this, the blood on her hands, for selfish reasons, and dug so deep exactly because she refused to see them. If she just thought about her once, something so simple, it could have been stopped. Unable to come to terms with this, and only worsened by counseling which convinces her it was all a dream and her, of course, negligent parents, Kadode decides to leave this reality and all her mistakes behind. This is what the invader allows Ouran to undo, returning to before they'd ever met and keeping Kadode from such possibilities, and on the personal which can't be denied instead. So, well, this has been a lot of words to say that we're kind of more selfish than we think. And to a degree, that's true. To think otherwise is just naive. But so is thinking that such a thing controls us. We are not just conditioned in genetics, we are what we do with those things. Just because we have to be selfish to a degree doesn't mean we still can't do good at the same time, a scale of gray just like the issues which divide us. And the best we can do may be leaning into that very fact. Because doing so doesn't mean that there is nothing important at all. It just means that what's important is at the root confined to our individual worlds, and as such under our influence to a degree. Think about it. If even someone as black and white as Kadode could have a feeling that caused an exception in Ouran, then, well, those feelings deep down are pretty strong, aren't they? They overtook the thoughts which are supposed to cover and justify them, without even noticing. They tricked a girl who refused to think of something into thinking about it. And it's because they're complex and unsummarized, not capable of being shared to others in a handful of letters like justice. Instead of saying that one term and believing we understand, we have to look at all the parts and draw our own conclusions. These personal complexities force the mind to think, stretch our logic as far as possible and evolve it, creating something unique from the process. Yes, Ouran was a bystander, but that word does not define her, only a part of her situation. We have to understand why she was one. She never came to Kadode's rescue for so long because she had past experiences which made her timid, creating a greater hurdle than just saying something, and as they become friends, Kadode sees this clearly. With that context, she can understand that she probably wouldn't have stepped in either in Ouran's situation. And it's also balanced out later when Ouran is a part of helping Kadode try and perform good actions, taking her own time and energy to do so until she's too sick to, the point at which Kadode goes at it alone and much darker. given the right situation, she will be a good person. Through their time and energy spent together, there's an importance in understanding that a couple words simply can't explain. They have to make their own term defined by those things, like a nickname, like Onton, the one that Kadode makes for her. Quite literally, to her, Ouran is something unique, an expression only between them which has a word yet to be bastardized by wider use. Once you have something like that, bystander will never do. That may be the key, forcing everyone to make their own words, to examine complexities in truth rather than in summary, giving them a personal reason to care about what all those abstract and impersonal words really mean. We see this more than anywhere in the invasion itself. The differences between timelines A and B, where the former has a world-ending event and the latter doesn't, is nothing more than one being getting to know these two girls. In timeline A, the investigator was found by a couple of random girls instead who we later meet, and, well, they don't seem too kind or bright. They chased him down and tied him up, leaving the little alien in a tunnel without food or water or anything for days to find him disappeared when they came back. Escaping after such cruelty, the investigator takes the easiest logical path to justify his negative feelings. This is what humanity is and should be judged upon, going the opposite route and defining names by generic terms to remove all of that context. And so he sends a report back to his home planet saying that the mission to colonize Earth would be an easy success, so much so that the mothership which arrives is sent with a locked reactor, preventing the maintenance it needs to go beyond an explosive 4-year limit, because there's no chance of that happening. With communication to back home severed, since this was also secretly a solution to the overpopulation back home, they're stuck there in that timeline. And after 4 years of experiencing the cruelty of humanity's superior strength, knowing that there is no option for peace or hiding, they form their own grudge, deciding that if they must all die out, so should this terrible planet and its inhabitants. By the end, they're waiting for the mothership to crash to Earth, explode, and destroy it entirely. All of this happened because one man set it up from the cruel actions of 2 children. The widest of all issues is deeply personal. But what prevents it is simply a greater personal event, time that was impossible to overlook because of the memories that it made. It's not the removal of evil, but simply a selfish desire in spite of it. In Timeline B, Kadode and Ouran happen upon the gang of children terrorizing the investigator, preventing them from doing so and taking him back home instead. Providing them with the means to communicate, he thanks them and explains his mission, which they take to heart. Kadode and Ouran will show him the best humanity has to offer. Of course, what follows isn't a great look for the species overall, but it does provide a lot of small good deeds from their school club before the larger, horrible ones we covered, painting a complicated picture of humanity. The same girl who showed him kindness becomes the epitome of cruelty, corrupted by the power that she was gifted. His flippancy with technology is likely a part of this test. What will happen to humans with this kind of futuristic power? And she failed that test. And the other girl tries to help her but fails just as much in her outburst over use of logic. And yet she's still saddened by the loss of a friend, even if that friend wanted to kill everyone. There simply isn't a word for that kind of relationship. In judging humanity upon this example, it's something he would just have to try and understand as it is without such summary words. And in collecting that perspective, he's also bonding with them, invested in their stories and his own evolving with them. They tried to do their best for his sake and the sake of every human they both could and couldn't see. They came up with a solution to hide him and make his job easier, preventing more of the same kind of cruelty they originally saved him from too. In all the hate, there is also love. And so is there really no hope for this species overall? Should they really be entirely wiped out? Having to ask that at all is the first step. But most of all, the problem with calling for action upon his initial grudge, and even all the evil that he has witnessed, worse than that initial grudge by miles, is that it would mean calling for the death of 2 friends. 2 people he's taken the time and energy to understand, had important conversations with. 2 humans who he likes, even as he condemns the rest. And so the report he sends back is simply that there is no reason for a mission to Earth, and that's all. He saw so much more evil than good, but acted on it so much less, all because he knew 2 people. A personal reason that doesn't destroy the evil but forces a deeper consideration of it, clogs the easy mental pathway of they should all die by putting actual names and faces to that abstract they. That's the key. Exceptions. Just as they showed Kadode her flaws, they might protect us from the absolute worst. We may not have to try and reach beyond and fix the world, but to simply tuck into our own personal and make it as good as possible. Share it with whoever it is reasonable for us to do so in order that they're now wrapped up in its complexity too. That since we can't end evil, we make choosing evil as hard as possible. This leans into our selfishness, acknowledges it in whole, and then tempers it with the inclusion to share. After all, if everyone decides to simply share their sadness, joy, and complexity with one or two others, then the whole world is wrapped up in a web and every attack on someone else ripples back to the person making it. If we all save someone, then everyone is saved, without ever giving up what was important or losing ourselves to things which we can't understand. Instead of words which change their meaning, we have the feelings which respond them to begin with. A much deeper picture, yes, harder to share, but that's the point, with the ability to communicate so much more because of that. It's in the statement that Ouran takes from Kadode and changes. Kadode says that she is absolute, but Ouran instead says,
"Because for you, Kadode, I am an absolute."
It's more words to take in, more time to say something less catchy, but that's what reduces the scope and gives us a more powerful context. Reduce the scale to just two girls, and, well, one of them really can be absolute. Alright, one more of these stupid notes. This is where we get back to that err on the side of positivity thing more, because a large aspect of what Kadode did was assuming the worst. As one person trying to address the world, she couldn't be everywhere at once, and so inherently she had to destroy possibilities, remove the ability for evil to occur in all cases due to her physical limitations. In trying to save one or two people though, you are building something, creating relationships and more reasons for things to occur. You slowly build up that web of connections, and eventually the world is reached anyway, but through a much stronger web than just that one direct line. While the latter involves a bit more risk, you can divert some of that into those more reasons, making guardrails against those risks, exactly because you're building new and not tearing down old. And we'll see an example of this right now. And this is wrapped up in a bow with not just prevention, but action as well. Reasons to do the things we can do to better the world when they appear. In the most recent events of Timeline A, Ouran has been falling in love with Oba, an invader. Despite looking just like a human, he's an invader just about their age, placed into a dead human body since he was about to go the same way. Within this shell, which is made apparent anytime he sneezes, he continues to exist, slowly learning the complexities of human language and then life alike. Now, these two have broad reasons why they could hate each other. Following the easiest logical path, we can see why some humans hate the invaders on premise. Their showing up changed that person's personal world for the worse. Even if the invaders didn't actively do it, it only happened because they were there, and so it's a coincidence that can be explained without all the difficult complexity. Instead of having to use mental power to understand, you just have to feel hatred. That's the easiest path. And Oba can do the same back, since they were sent on false information and are now simply dealing with the consequences of a warhawk species. For both sides, there's always an assumption to just make things easier personally. But in that moment where he and Ouran first meet by surprise, when he sneezes and his head turns, when a human tendency is to react, scream, and attack for safety, Ouran instead goes with curiosity, probably a consequence of not really having a future to protect anyway. She decides to try and understand Oba instead. I mean, it would be new if nothing else, some excitement before the world ends itself, just like when she stole from that crash site. She wasn't there because it was an important event, she was there for fun. This is the first trick, a selfish reason that gives a chance to time and energy which will follow. Because that desire to feed her interests just happens to mean spending her days with Oba, which naturally constitutes importance, time, and energy. From proximity alone, they're going to be more important than not to each other, each day another possibility given up on them. This turns it into something much more, complexity slowly interweaving until honesty is a given and anything would be done to preserve it. It becomes something beyond the generic term. Yes, love, but love said by Ouran on that beach at that time, specifically to Oba on that vacation after the walk they just went on in a surprise kiss. All the things those two people know, but no one else can. So when it comes time for the mothership to crash, Oba has to act on what he knows. From a device which can read memories, and the memories of Ouran, who was told the ship's password from the Timeline B investigator, he's the only one who can actually do something about it. And he has to because, from everything we've just covered, the easiest path is no longer in action. The assumption of his everyday, the most important thing that will always be there, is Ouran. To do nothing and lose her is losing what he wished the rest of his entire life could be, and that's not something one can easily ignore. All the possibilities they want to be real holding an almost physical weight. The easier path isn't living with that forever somewhere else, it's taking the risk now to save it. The issue is of the whole world, but only means something because of these specific memories they made, the importance they gave to times and places that this action would save. And he uses that motivation to get aboard the ship, get into the reactor, and even though he can't prevent it from crashing or even exploding, he can make it go off early and reduce the losses, save the greater planet overall. And so he does, managing to escape himself even if he'll never meet Ouran again. But she does still exist. And so even as the planet reaches its worst times ever, he has a reason to keep going himself, because maybe one day they could meet again. And this is where construction and keeping its possibilities alive is really revealed as important, because yes, this Earth that is reached through Oba's actions is still horrible, and in many ways becomes a living hell with the Fujin running rampant and killing anyone they see. Also, another note for ship was more right there. However, because it wasn't entirely wiped out, Kadode's father, who just wakes up from being taken over by an invader for years, is able to meet Makoto and Futaba, who reunite with Oba and the soldier who saved him at the machine Ouran once used to go back in time. He does the same and re-prevents the invasion, turning the nearly hopeless end back into a more hopeful one, although somewhat marred by Kadode's gripes with her daily life. However, the key logic is that one act of love kept the possibility for another alive, or rather many did, as the web comes into play. Kadode being open to making friends in the past, those friends being Makoto and Futaba who are trying to save people in the future, the past knowledge that Oba shared with them which came about from him trying to save Ouran. It is the collection of all these small moments of love which creates the great one to save it all in the end. Most grand actions are just the sum of small personal ones before it, and even if they're not immediate, they will come much stronger exactly because they took so much time to permeate and make themselves important in a deep way to everyone. Anyway, last note, end of the video. Earth's salvation didn't happen because of ideals or movements. It happened because there was something much more absolute, something which consumed an entire world within the wider one, someone not known in terms or labels, but in feelings and memories, hazy and hardly understood, but always there, always driving us, the root of all things. Something that can only ever be ours, unbastardized by the personal uses of others, even as it makes the ability for others to do so the same so possible. What saved the world was selfish love. Now, there's the question of if we really agree with everything DDD is trying to say, or at least felt like it was. I think the caveat earlier of real issues only is for sure required, because there are things like human rights that simply aren't up for debate, maintained only by the false idea that somehow one's gain must be another's loss. I might be addressing that as well as declinism in a dedicated video later on. I think DDDD skirts just past declinism by giving the personal reasons to move forward and progress anyway for the characters, but I just wanted to address it to clear up any possible confusion. I also think DDD could have painted a better picture of protest, relying on the fact that Futaba is the most morally sound and explorative of all the characters. I think it still comes across as worthwhile, but I really want to stress that I don't think it's pointless. It's certainly not as much as the series shows, just that it can be difficult and demotivating when it takes so long and drains so much. And finally, we have to stress that this idea of good selfishness, I guess you could say, only works with awareness and togetherness. We still have to do some amount of work to try and understand what we want deep down, because then, we can't act on falsehoods like Kadode did. We see how terribly that ends. And then we have to do a little bit more work to share the spoils of doing so with others for it to have any of that positive effect. even if that just means laughs and smiles as we wind down from achieving those once, because those smiles and laughs might be the only ones someone has ever seen from someone like you. We need to be present and honest so that bonds are made, and then are true and complex, avoiding simply convenient relationships for ones which are truly deep, and at times, challenging. I think this is something I've failed at, first with friends, and secondly, well, with almost everyone. With the friendships that I feel slowly drifting away, I know deep down that it's almost the same as it once was. We can laugh the same way, we can play the same games, we can hold the same memories. But new terms came in and we never added complexity to them. We know the broad strokes of what they mean, but like a teenager the night before an exam on Spark Notes, just enough to not ask questions and nothing more. And that honestly might be even worse than not knowing at all. We don't know what those labels really mean, the feelings that occur to someone who has them and how they can contradict wider, often false narratives, or just personal feelings. On my end, it's seeing them all becoming parents. And that's something I've failed to understand at every turn. I mean, first because I never really enjoyed the existence of the relationship that term denotes. I remember when I got into a serious relationship in high school, enough so that we would go places with their parents pretty regularly. And whenever I got home, me and my brother would always talk about how weird it was for people to want to choose to be around their parents. Because ours were either never home, so we didn't develop those deep bonds to begin with, and when they were, they fought, and once they divorced, the one we were left with would have us sit in the car for an hour as she went tanning and would have us spend our free time after school waiting at the mall till she tried to return clothes that were never worn sitting in her trunk for 2 years. And you've probably heard me speak positively about my dad, the other side of that, but, well, that's for one reason. Because I'm an adult. I'm someone squarely on their own 2 feet who doesn't need support and lessons from my blood anymore. The good relationship we share, well, of course it's parent and child, but it only formed once I was no longer actually a child. I can only love him as an adult. Seeing these failures of parenting again and again, ones which extended generations beyond this as well, became something almost unattainable to me, knowing all the ways that it could go wrong and create, well, another depressed, lonely kid like I was. The very concept of choosing to be a parent at all to me is somewhat irresponsible. How can anyone ever think they're ready to raise an entire life, the most precious thing? I know that can't be the case, and I respect the people who do it well, who can maintain such a precious thing in an often terrible world, but I can know and I can feel as two separate things, and I can't help what I feel. So when all my old friends decided that they wouldn't even think of hitting 30 before they had kids, an invisible rift opened between us. The people who thought of parenting with a smile, and the one who couldn't. And as I began to explore myself, looking and dressing much differently than before, I imagine they felt the same about my own terms, knowing what they were, but not what was really behind them. As we collected experiences in new locations and with different people, there was simply more to question, and, well, from that, less time to actually do it in. Yeah, we could talk all about it, but this wasn't college where we had 2 hours free in the game room each day. It was hastily cobbled together gatherings and minimal schedule openings of adult life. So I was curious about their decisions and almost asked at a couple points, but I always found an excuse not to in the vibes. That is, not ever really feeling the right time for it. We got together to laugh and play games and forget all the depressing, serious things about life, not dive into them. I didn't want to bring those rare escapist nights down with all the serious talk of motivations and reasoning, especially when we were drinking most of the time, so we wouldn't even be capable of giving good answers and then listening to good answers. What friends needed to be was just there for the times, the experiences, right? To provide the revival of those seemingly bygone times. But that's exactly what led to them becoming so. Without the glue of our similar contexts, our attendance at the same college, we needed to get to know each other again. We needed to actually ask and listen, but never did. The gaps began to grow and questions began to be filled in with assumptions. Newer relationships with similar contexts took more space in time and the mind experiencing it, and inconvenience found even less reason to understand and more to assume. After all, we don't even see each other that much, right? So do I really need to know why they became parents? it stopped being why are they parents and just became they are parents, a fact without any more reason. Yes, even though I had a name to put to the term, memories that we shared together, it still meant nothing to me. It meant nothing because we never allowed it to, because all the tools were placed right in front of us, but in the name of preserving one good hour of one good night, we tossed away all the ability to build more with them, because we knew, but we never knew. Just knowing that they were parents wasn't enough to make me care about parents. But to finally make it to one of those events for one of the kids after feeling bad for not making it to any of them across 1 to 2 years, and to see my friend still wearing the same horrible green shirt with red basketball short combination and slip-on shoes, that terrible look that plagued our nights time and time again. But to see that spending the entire time following his kid around as she excitedly ran around the entirely, literally new place to her minimal existence, to see that same form and the same ugly clothes take on such a new purpose, a new responsibility that completely shattered everything the appearance itself said, well, that was different. I couldn't just easily accept my mind now, knowing that he was being so responsible that I didn't even get to talk to him and all the time that we were there. A conflict needed to be resolved inside of me. Maybe their desire to be parents started just as the random whim to have kids before some arbitrary age, but even if it did, it was now something a lot more. It was a laugh and a smile yet to be disturbed by everything of the wider world, protected exactly by their will. It was the very beginning of hope and joy. Having actually looked, having honestly looked, going to an event I had no desire in my bones to ever see, that just comfort finally let me appreciate why the comfort was lacking sometimes. I can't just hate that word from my past now. I have to love some part of it from my present. I have to consider it as something more. I have to think about it as my friend's happiness as I consider my priorities and my votes, the words I share and how they'll change people and their mindsets. The relationship alone, the personal alone didn't do that. Only doing it with honesty and intent let it mean anything at all. And this is why I think I've failed many more people and often refusing to use my own term as well, because the picture they have of me is incomplete, gaps filled in with simply whatever validates their own experience rather than the truth. I am a very private person just by nature, that's how I like to be, but it's undeniable that it does let people assume what they need to of me, to enjoy things not exactly how I make them, but as who they think is making them. And if I embraced those terms more, wore them more openly, and presented something you enjoyed as someone you may not, then maybe it would be able to change their mind about that very fact. Sure, someone would reject the video and everything I had to say on premise alone, but if someone watched, took it all in, and was moved by what I said, only to then see that I wasn't what they thought, could that be the missing depth which prevented them from outright hating it? And that's why I have to say that my favorite character in this whole show is Makoto. Anxiety is in a story that I deeply relate to and am only now acting on after so many years of those fears. Every week I shake in anxiety as a needle presses through my skin by my own hand and injects the right hormones to finally make me the person I want to grow into. Just 2 nights ago, it drew blood for the first time, and to be honest, I was about 5 seconds from passing out and needed a TV show shoved in my face to avoid a panic attack from it as I was shaking pretty uncontrollably. It is a terrible, awful process, but I do it to prove to myself that it is important enough to face my fears more than just taking a pill. And I take no pride in it. I think it's the worst thing I've had to come to terms with and deal with in my life. It's a curse that it's a part of who I am, and I wish deeply that it wasn't. But it is. And I keep speaking more and more useless sentences to avoid actually saying it, because I know it could play a part in killing everything I have created here and love so deeply. But if all of that is to mean anything, then I have to listen to my own words for once and not forget or ignore the lesson. I am not a guy. I am a trans as hell woman, or at least I hope to be one day. I know that could be obvious from other videos, but I never actually said the word before, and I don't really want this to be some big announcement outside of this video. I'm fine just keeping it between, us, the people who made it this far in the video, because if someone clicked off well before this, then hounding them in the comments about using the wrong pronoun or anything like that is not going to mean shit to someone who already decided the video wasn't worthwhile. But for those who stuck around and know, I do hope that all this could show a different side to something you maybe didn't really know. If you enjoyed the video, you enjoyed the work of that term. Are you able to hate it? Something which overlaps with your own characteristics and experience? Something that you've now spent at least an hour of your life with? I hope not. For all of this to mean anything, I hope not.